Andy Galpin. It's been a long time coming. We have friends in common, but this is actually the first time we've sat down face to face.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
Yeah, there are only a handful, meaning about 3 or 4 people who I trust enough in the exercise physiology space that when they speak, I not only listen, but I modify my protocols. And you are among those 3 or 4 people. So first of all, a debt of gratitude. Thank you. You've greatly shaped the protocols that I use. And I know there's far more for me and for others to learn. So you're a professor, you teach in university, and you have a tremendous range of levels of exploration. Muscle biopsy, literally images down the microscope, all the way to training professional athletes and everything in between. So you are truly an N of one. And just to start us off, I would love to have you share with us what you think most everybody or even everybody should know about principles of strength training, principles of endurance training, and principles of, let's call it hypertrophy, power, and the other sort of categories of training. And this could be very top contour, but what do you think everybody on planet Earth should know about these categories of personal and athletic development?
Well, that's a great first question. Holy cow. I think I'll start it this way. I tend to think about, there's about 9 different adaptations you can get from exercise. Fat loss is not one of those. It is a byproduct, but that's not really what I'm getting at. And so we can kind of categorize everything like that. And what we can talk about are what are the concepts that you need to hit within each one. And then you could have infinite discussion of the different methodologies, right? And so that first thing to hit is the concepts are actually fairly few, but the methods are many, right? People have said that in iterations throughout time. So if you walk from the very beginning, the first one to think about is what we'll just call skill. So this is improving anything from, say, a golf swing to a squatting technique to running. And this is just simply moving mechanically how you want your body to move. I'm just going to globally call that skill. From there, we're going to get into speed. So this is moving as fast as possible. The next one is power. And power is a function of speed, but it's also a function of the next one, which is strength. So if you actually multiply strength by speed, you get power. And the reason I'm making this distinction, by the way, is some of these are very close, and I'm going in a specific order on purpose here. For example, power is, like I just said, it's a function of speed and strength. So if you improve speed, you've also likely improved power, but not necessarily, right? Because it could have come from the force direction either. So there's carryover. So like a lot of things that you would do for the development of strength and power, they are somewhat similar, but then there's differences, right? So things that you would do correctly for power would really not develop much strength and vice versa. So we can get into all these details later. Once you get past strength, then the next one kind of down the list is hypertrophy. This is muscle size, right? Growing muscle mass is one way to think about it. After hypertrophy, you get into these categories of, the next one is, these are all globally endurance-based issues. And the very first one is called muscular endurance. So this is your ability to do, how many push-ups can you do in 1 minute, things like that. Past muscular endurance, you're now into more of an energetic or even cardiovascular fatigue. So you've left the local muscle and you're now into the entire physiological system and its ability to produce and sustain work. And we can get into a bunch of differentiations within endurance, but just to keep it really simple right now, the very first one, think about this as, I call this anaerobic power, right? So this is your ability to produce a lot of work for, say, 30 seconds to maybe 1 minute, kind of 2 minutes like that. The next one down then is more closely aligned to what we'll call your VO2 max. So this is your ability to kind of do the same thing, but more of a time domain of, say, 3 to 12 minutes. So this is going to be a maximum heart rate, but it's going to be well past just max heart rate. Then after that, we have what I call long duration endurance. So this is your ability to sustain work. The time domain doesn't matter in terms of how fast you're going. It's how long can you sustain work. This is 30 plus minutes of no break, like that. So as just a high level overview, those are the different things you can target. And again, some of those cross over and some are actually a little bit contrarian to the other ones. So pushing towards one is maybe going to sacrifice something else. So as an overall start, that's really what we're looking at. Within all of those, though, they do have similar concepts in terms of there's a handful of things you have got to do to make all of those things work. And we could talk about as many of those as you want, but one of them is functionally called progressive overload. So whichever one you're trying to improve at, if you want to continue to improve, you have to have some method of overload. And as you well know, you've talked about a lot, adaptation physiologically happens as a byproduct of stress. So you have to push a system. So if you continue to do, say, the exact same workout over time, you better not expect much improvement. You can keep maintenance, but you're not going to be adding additional stress. So in general, you have to have some sort of progressive overload. And we can talk in detail about what that means for each category. But this could come from adding more weights. This could come from adding more repetitions. It could come from doing it more often in the week. It could come from adding complexity to the movement. So going from, say, a partial range of motion to a full range of motion, or adding other variables. So there's a lot of different ways to progress, but you have to have some sort of movement forward. So if you have this kind of routine where you've built Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday or something, and you just do that infinitely, you're not going to get very far. So that's, I guess, the most high-level overview of all the things people can go after. And then we can go from whatever direction you want from there.
Well, I'd love to do the deep dive on each one of these
Yeah,
for several hours. But I imagine that over time we probably will. I'd love to chat about a couple of these in a bit more depth. So in terms of defining what the progressive overload variables are for these different categories, maybe we could hit the two most common combinations of these 9 things. The first one being strength and hypertrophy, and maybe we could lump power in there. Maybe not. You're the exercise physiologist,
no,
but strength and hypertrophy, which at least bear some relationship. And then maybe separately, we could explore sustained work endurance, this 30 minutes or longer continuously, because I think many people train in that regime. And probably something like VO2 max anaerobic as well, because I know that a number of people now incorporate so-called HIIT or high intensity interval training, I think with the hopes of either shortening their workouts and or gaining some additional cardiovascular benefit. So if we could start with strength and hypertrophy. I know many people want to be stronger. They want to grow larger muscles or at least maintain what they have. So what are the progressive overload principles that are most effective over time for strength and hypertrophy?
Okay. So I'll actually go a little step back. With every one of those categories I talked about, you have what we call your modifiable variables. So this is a very short list of all the things you can modify, the different variables within your workout that can be modified that will change the outcome. A fancy way of saying, if you do this differently, then you're going to get a different result. So modifiable variables. The very first one of those is called choice. So this is the exercise choice that you select. Now, one of, I'm going to go double back here, so I'm kind of doing a little bit of inception. So follow me here as I'm going up a layer to come down a couple layers. I have these fundamental laws of strength and conditioning they're kind of like a little bit of a joke, but progressive overload is one of those laws. Another one of those laws is your exercises themselves do not determine adaptations. So here's what I mean. If you're like, I want to get stronger, you can't select an exercise. That doesn't determine you getting strong. If you don't do the exercise correctly, and I'm not even referring to the technique, that of course matters, but if you don't execute it in the right fashion, then you're not going to get that adaptation. So if you choose, I want to get stronger, I'm going to do a bench press. Well, if you do the wrong set range, the wrong repetition range, the wrong speed, you won't get strength, you maybe get muscular endurance and very little strength adaptation. So the exercise selection itself is important, but it does not determine the outcome adaptation. So the very first thing that you need to think about if you're like, I want to get stronger or add muscle, is not the exercise choice, right? It is the application of the exercise. What are the sets? What are the reps? What are the rest ranges that you're using? That's going to be your primary determinant. Now, some exercises are certainly better for some adaptations. For example, a deadlift is probably not a great exercise to do for long duration endurance. Like you could theoretically do 30 straight minutes of deadlifting, but it's probably not our best choice, right? It's probably a pretty good choice for strength development, right? Because you're going to do a low repetition, high set range. You could theoretically do bicep curls for power, but probably not your best choice, right? Single joint isolation movement is not the best for developing power. You've ever done a bicep curl as fast as you possibly can, like that's not going to go well. So in theory, any exercise can produce any adaptation given the execution is performed properly. So now that we've understood that a little bit, the exercise itself does not determine the adaptation. Coming within each one of these categories, exercise choice is an important variable because it does lend you to things like what movement pattern you're in. So in other words, if you want to get stronger and you're thinking, okay, what exercise do I do? You need to think a little bit about what muscle groups do I want to use? And that's going to be leading you towards the exercise choice. For example, I want to use my quads more. Okay, fine. Maybe you're going to choose more of a front squat type of variation, a goblet squat. So the load is in front of you. If you want to emphasize maybe more of your hamstrings and glutes, you're going to maybe put a barbell on your back or do a different one. So the exercise choice is important to the prescription because it's going to determine a lot of your success. Okay, another kind of simpler way to think about this. If you're a beginner or moderate to intermediate, or maybe you don't have a coach, you probably want to hedge towards an exercise selection that is a little bit easier technically. So you maybe don't want to do a barbell back squat. It's actually a pretty complicated movement. Maybe you want to do a little bit more of, again, a goblet squat, or even use some machines or a split squat, something that's a little bit simpler because you don't have a coach, you're not a professional athlete. The likelihood of success is higher and the risk is now gone lower. So the very first variable within all of these is the exercise choice. The second one is the intensity, and that refers to, in this context, not perceived effort, like, wow, that was a really intense workout. It is quite literally either a percentage of your 1 rep at max or a percentage of your maximum heart rate or VO2 max. So for the strength-based things, you want to think about what's the percentage of the maximum weight I could lift one time, and that's what we're going to call 1 rep max. Or it's a percentage of my heart rate, right? So if I tell you to get on a bike and I want you to do intervals and I want you at 75%, I'm typically referring to 75% of your max heart rate or VO2 max or something like that. If I tell you to do squats at 75%, that means 75% of the maximum amount of weight you could lift one time or close.
In terms of determining 1 rep max, I confess I've never actually taken the 1 rep max for any exercise, but I have some internal sense of what that might be or what range it might be. Is it necessary for people to assess their 1 repetition maximum before going into these sorts of programs?
No, not at all. I think a more intuitive way is to take a repetition range. Well, you can do this a couple different ways. So there are equations you can run, and you can just Google these anywhere, and these are called conversion charts. And so it says, okay, if I did 75 pounds on my bench press and I did it 8 times, you can just run an estimate to say that, okay, you're probably going to be able to bench about 95 pounds for 1 rep max or something. So that's a very easy conversion chart. So just pick a load that you feel comfortable with, but it's kind of heavy, but not like crazy heavy, and do as many repetitions as you can with a really good technique, and then look what that number would be. So conversion
probably safer than doing one repetition maximum.
For the general public who has, again, no coaching, it's safer. For a professional athlete, it's not any safer, but or not even a professional athlete, but a trained person with a coach. But for most people, yeah, that's a good way to go about it. You can also just kind of do it with feel, in the sense that, say you want to do a set of 5 repetitions, and you do the load and you think, I could have done 1 or 2 more. And then you kind of have an idea of what that number is going to be. If you think, man, that last one I had to kind of really, really, really get after it, then maybe just call that number, right? So you don't have to get overly concerned. In fact, when we start getting into these number ranges, you're going to see that they're all ranges. We're not going to give a specific 95% for one of these exact reasons. It's not that precise for most of them. In fact, some of them, like hypertrophy, have enormous ranges that you almost can't miss. So the intensity in that case doesn't even matter for the most part, because that's not the primary determinant. Some of these you're going to see intensity is the determinant, and some of these you're going to see volume is the true determinant. So intensity, though, is the second one. Choice was the very first one, manipulatable variable. Intensity was the second one. The third one is what we call volume. And so this is just how many reps and how many sets are you doing, right? So if you're going to do 3 sets of 10, that volume would be 30, right? 5 sets of 5, that volume is 25. It's just a simple equation. How much work are you totally doing? The next one past that is called rest intervals. So this is the amount of time you're taking in between typically a set. Then from there you have progression, which is what we started to talk about, this progressive overload. Are you increasing by weight or reps or rest intervals or complexity or whatever? So all of those things can be changed as a method of progression. And so maybe you want to go progressing from a single joint exercise like a leg extension on a machine, and you want to progress by moving to a whole body movement like a squat. That in of itself, you don't have to change the load or the reps or the rest. That is a representation of progressive overload. And it's probably a pretty good place to start because number one, especially for beginners, you want to make sure that the movement pattern is correct. Don't worry about intensity. Don't worry about rep ranges or any of these things. You need to learn to move correctly, and you need to give your body some time to develop some tissue tolerance so that you're not getting overtly sore. In general, soreness is a terrible proxy for exercise quality. It's a really bad way to estimate whether it was a good or a bad workout, especially for people in that beginner to middle to moderate. In fact, even that for our professional athletes, we do not use soreness as a metric of a good workout. It's a really bad idea for a bunch of reasons. On the same token, because stress is required for adaptation, you don't want to leave at the gym and feel like, I don't really do much. Like there has to be there. So if you think about soreness on a scale of 1 to 10, you probably want to spend most of your time in like the 3.
You mean post-exercise?
Yeah.
In between workouts?
Totally.
And I know we'll talk about recovery extensively later, but if one body part or set of body parts is sore, is that an indication that one should stay out of training? I would imagine the answer is no, in most cases. And secondarily to that, if a particular muscle is sore, does that mean that muscle is not ready to be trained again?
Yeah, the answer to both those is the same, which is no, right? You can certainly train a sore muscle. You need to, I guess, have a little bit of feel on that, right? So if you're sore of like, okay, like, and you're moving around a little bit and you're like, man, this is a little bit sore, you can train. If you're like, I can't sit on the couch without crying because my glutes are so sore, like we probably don't need to train again, right?
Does whimpering count as crying?
Yeah. In that particular case, I'd say you've actually gone to the place of detriment because now you're going to have to skip a training session and now you're behind. So your actual total volume, say across the month, is actually going to be lower because you went way too hard in those workouts, had to take too many days off in between. You're going to see that you're going to cover less distance over the course of a month or 6 months or even a year. So you want to walk a pretty fine line. And for most people, I would say hedge a little bit on the side of less sore than more sore. Because frequency is very, very important for almost all these adaptations.
Training frequency.
Which is the last modifiable variable, right? Frequency, which is how many times per week are you doing that thing. So those are kind of our global things that we can play with. So when I'm trying to manipulate and get strength versus hypertrophy, or you know what, I want like a little bit of both, all those variables are the things that are going through my mind. Which one do I need to move in which direction so that I can get this outcome and not this outcome over here? For example, some folks might want to get stronger, but not put muscle mass on. Some folks are just kind of want both. And that's a lot of the general public. I want to get a little stronger and a little bit more muscle. Great. But there are instances where people, for performance reasons or for purely personal preference, like I don't want to get any more muscle. Great. But I want to get stronger. Awesome. If you manipulate those variables correctly, you can get exactly that. Very little development of muscle size and a lot of development in strength. And this is why we continue to break world records in sports like powerlifting and weightlifting that have weight classes. So there's a top number that we can hit in terms of body size, but yet we continue to get stronger and faster. So this is very possible if you understand how to manipulate all those variables. So that being said, we can start off with, you wanted to go strength and
strength. And I love that you mentioned the fact that it is possible to increase strength without increasing muscle size, at least not dramatically, because I think it's not just weight class athletes. I know a lot of people who, for aesthetic reasons, they'd like to be stronger. They're hearing that having strong bones and strong muscles and tendons is great for longevity and for avoiding injury and so many other features of life. And yet they don't want to fill out progressively larger and larger sizes of clothing.
And we can go harder to the mechanisms on that piece if you want. Or we can save that and come back to it.
Sure. What I'd love to, what I'd love to know, though, was if we could define some of these modifiable variables in the context of strength. So let's say we're somebody who, I come to you and I say, and let's just say for sake of balance here, because she actually does do some weight training, I bring my sister in and I say, me and my sister both want to get stronger.
Yep.
What modifiable variables should, how should we modify the variables?
Love it. All right, great. I'm going to do Inception on you one more time. So one of my other laws, this won't be fast, I promise, of strength and conditioning is, in general, the default is all joints through all range of motion. So this is important because it's going to answer your very first question on this strength category. So in general, the ankle should go through the full range of motion in the ankle. The knee should go through the full range of motion, the knee, the hip, the elbow, et cetera, right?
Across the workout, not in a single movement.
Well, right.
I would hope.
Well,
unless there's an amazing exercise I haven't heard about.
Well, there are some exercises that we're going to call more full body. Think about a full snatch. Like you're going to take a lot of your muscles, a lot of your joints through a lot of the range of motions. Other ones, like in isolation, we call these single joint exercises. So imagine a bicep curl. You have one joint in that particular case, the elbow moving, the shoulder, and everything else is pretty much stable. And this is how we'll differentiate multi-joint from single joint movements. But yeah, so across, I would even say it doesn't even have to be the day, but maybe throughout the week. Try to get every joint through full range of motion. Now, a couple of quick caveats to that. I am not advocating using full range of motion and allowing really bad exercise technique. So when I say full range of motion, that's the default. That doesn't mean every single person can do that for every single exercise. It means that's where we should be striving to, and that's our starting point. You're going to see a lot less injury and a lot more productivity out of your training sessions. In fact, the science is fairly clear on this one. Strength development as well as hypertrophy is generally enhanced with a larger range of motion of training. And the mechanisms are like somewhat understood on that. So that being said, if you have to get into, say, a bad position with your, say, low back, the spine is a very good one here. In general, the spine should stay very neutral is what we call it. So no flexion, no extension, especially in the lumbar region. So if you're doing, say, a deadlift, and in order to take your knee through a full range of motion on a deadlift, you have to compromise your back position. That's no bueno. So caveats there aside, don't kill me. Like in good positions always.
And don't kill yourselves,
yes.
More importantly.
So why that matters is if we walk through strength, the very first thing I'm going to go through is the exercise selection. So let's choose an exercise which ideally has a full range of motion or close to it that doesn't induce injury for you, that you can still maintain good neck and low back and position and everything else. You feel comfortable with, so you can feel strong, but you don't feel like, oh my gosh, if you've never snatched before, having you do a snatch for a maximum, even 75%, like it's a terrible idea. You're not going to feel confident. It's going to be a train wreck. I would rather put you on a machine bench press. So you can go, I feel stable, I feel safe here, and I can just express my strength. So exercise choice in general, full range of motion, and you want to kind of balance between the movement areas. So this is an upper body press. So this is pushing away from you, bench press, things like that. Upper body pull, pulling an implement towards you. Bent row, pull up. The pressing should be horizontal, so perpendicular to your body, as well as vertical. So this is lifting a weight over top of your head, lifting a weight away from you. The pull version is pulling horizontally to you and pulling vertically down, pull up, things like that. From the lower body, we typically call these hinges. It's sort of a funny muscle thing that no one's going to laugh at, but like maybe me and you here, is we'll categorize muscles or movements, exercises as pushes and pulls, right? So like a squat tends to be a push because you're pushing away the ground. A deadlift is a pull because you're pulling the implement up to you. But in reality, every single exercise is only ever a pull because muscle doesn't push things away. Muscle can only contract and pull on itself. And so, again, super nerdy thing that like most people are like, yeah, and everyone's like, that's so dumb.
No, but I think it's a really important point because it also speaks to something I think we'll get into later, which is that, posterior chain, anterior chain.
Totally.
And if that's mysterious to people, it'll become clear before long. Posterior chain, anterior chain makes a lot of sense to me because of the way it's grounded in the firing of motor neurons, which is ultimately what controls muscle. So it's
you
also,
and your
I think,
nerves all the time.
Exactly. So it also depends on the lens through which one looks at life and exercise. Of course, my lens is primarily neuroscience. So, but I realized that the importance. I like this idea of pushing perpendicular to the body, overhead, pulling both toward the body and from overhead. That just makes really good intuitive sense, especially since a lot of people were just listening to this and not watching it. So in your minds, folks, you can think about pushing away like a punch or overhead, like lifting something overhead and then pulling toward your midline or toward your body rather, and then pulling yourself up like a pull-up in PE class for those of that.
So the lower body's the same thing, right? It's some sort of pushing away like a squat or a split squat or a lunge or something like that. And then some sort of, again, what we'll call pull or hinge. So a deadlift or a Romanian deadlift or a hamstring curl or something where you're contracting and pulling the thing. And you could split these into like 1,000 different categories. If you're really in that field, you're going to want to add a bunch of other ones. But that's just like a rough conception. So if you were going to do a single workout, you could choose 4 exercises. And you could choose one of each. One press, upper body press, one upper body pull, one lower body hinge, one lower body press. And that would be like a decently well-rounded exercise. That's your exercise selection. And if you're taking those through a full range of motion, you're at a pretty good spot, as close as you can. The next one is intensity. So if you want to develop strength, this comes back to one of my favorite scientists of all time, who happens to be a nerve guy, actually. And generally, I like to shit on nerves as much as I possibly can because I'm a muscle guy. But I have to give Henneman some credit here, right? And I know you know who that is.
Henneman size principle.
Yeah, of course, right? So this is a series of papers, I think it was in Nature.
At least some of them, yeah.
Yeah, in 1954, 56, or like something. You can fact check me, I'm sure you will. But he basically outlined this idea that, okay, there's a certain recruitment threshold needed for neurons to fire. And we have muscle fibers in what we'll call fast twitch muscle fibers and slow twitch muscle fibers. And in general, you're going to activate the slow twitch ones first because they tend to be associated with low threshold motor neurons. It's not exactly that way, but it's close enough, right? Well, the only way that you activate some of these higher threshold neurons is to demand the muscle to produce more force. And it's fairly specific to force, right? It's not something you can do over an endurance thing, right? Unless it gets really extreme and fatigue happens. So in general, the only way to use these big chunks of your muscle, which are incredibly important for aging, by the way, one of the major problems we have with aging development of aging-related issues with muscle is the fact that we lose fast twitch fibers preferentially. And then we have major problems as we go down the line because we've lost a big chunk of our strength and size. So you want to make sure these fibers stay alive and intact. Okay, so if that being said, the only way to develop strength is then to challenge the muscle to produce more total force. If you are fairly untrained or new, I guess I should have stated this all at the beginning as well. One more inception, then I'll stop. When it comes to this level of detail of exercise prescription, a fairly untrained person is going to respond basically the same to every single thing you do. In fact, we've done this in the lab many times. We've done training studies doing things like 30 minutes of cycling and seeing huge increases in muscle strength and size, which is not a prescription for most people to increase size, but people that are really untrained, if you did plyometrics or strength training or endurance running, they all just get better at everything. So that caveat kind of aside, if you want to be more intentional and more specific to the goal of strength, you need to produce more force. Specificity matters, right? So we have